Get ready for a powerful story about forgiveness, redemption, and community. When David and his son Jaden are unfairly turned away from a pool, they face an act of quiet discrimination. But as the truth about David's connection to the pool comes to light, everything changes, not just for them, but for the entire community. How will David respond to the injustice? And what unexpected transformation will unfold for the man who wronged him? Stay tuned to find out. Like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories, and let's dive in. The sun beamed down on the city's bustling streets, but for 7-year-old Jaden, nothing compared to the excitement bubbling up inside him. Today was the day his first swimming lesson. He had dreamed about this for weeks, imagining himself diving into the cool water, floating like a fish, and swimming with effortless grace. His father David walked beside him, a calm presence amid Jaden's endless chatter. They were headed to the newly built City Central Pool, the jewel of their neighborhood, a sleek modern facility that gleamed under the morning sun. The pool had quickly become the talk of the town, not just because of its luxurious design, but because it was meant to be a place for everyone, a true community space. Jaden couldn't contain his excitement. "Dad, do you think I'll be able to do a flip in the water by the end of today?" David smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's focus on floating first, champ. One step at a time." As they neared the entrance, Jaden's eyes widened, taking in the sprawling pool behind the glass windows. The pool was massive, surrounded by sunbeds and umbrellas, with sparkling blue water calling to him. Children were already lining up by the edge, preparing for their lessons, and the sound of splashing echoed through the space. But there was one figure near the entrance who didn't seem to share Jaden's enthusiasm. Ben, the pool's attendant, stood stiffly near the registration desk, his face impassive, scanning the families as they arrived. Middle-aged and strict, Ben had worked at various pools over the years, and while he did his job efficiently, there was something in his demeanor that made people feel unwelcome. Jaden hardly noticed Ben as they passed, his attention fully on the pool, but David caught the slight narrowing of Ben's eyes as they approached. "Dad, can we go in now? I want to start." Jaden tugged at his father's hand, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. David chuckled. "Patience, bud. Let's get checked in first." They approached the registration desk, and David handed over their membership cards. Jaden hopped from foot to foot, barely able to contain his excitement. But as the cards were handed over, Ben stepped forward, blocking their path. "Only members are allowed in this pool," Ben said, his voice cold. David blinked, confused for a moment. "We are members," he replied calmly, holding up the cards. "My son has a swimming lesson today." Ben's eyes flicked to Jaden, then back to David, and his expression hardened. "Sorry, this place is closed today for a special event. You'll have to come back another time." Jaden's smile faltered. "What, but I've been waiting for this." David's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice remaining steady but firm. "We checked the schedule. There's no special event today. My son has been looking forward to this for weeks." Ben didn't budge. "Like I said, the pool's closed. You can make a reservation for another day?" The tension was rising, the subtle hostility in Ben's tone unmistakable. David could see the look in Ben's eyes, the way he stood with crossed arms as though he was drawing a line between them. It wasn't about reservations or events. This was personal. Jaden, sensing the tension, tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, what's happening? Why can't we go in?" David looked down at his son, his heart sinking. The joy in Jaden's face had faded, replaced by confusion and disappointment. David clenched his jaw, then turned back to Ben. "This is ridiculous," David said, stepping forward slightly. His voice remained calm, but there was a steely edge to it now. "Other kids have come in. We're members, just like everyone else. Is there a problem here?" Ben's face twisted into a grimace, and he replied with forced sarcasm, "I'm just following the rules. Come back another time." Jaden's eyes welled up, his excitement drained away in an instant. David felt the weight of his son's disappointment, but before he could say anything more, an older man approached from across the pool area. Mr. Harold, the pool's owner, walked over with a calm yet firm presence. His white hair framed a face lined with age and wisdom, but his eyes were sharp as they took in the scene. He had noticed the exchange from afar and made his way over to intervene. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Harold asked, looking directly at Ben. Ben straightened up, his face reddening slightly. "This gentleman and his son don't understand that they can't come in here today," he muttered. "That's the problem, sir. Mr. Harold glanced from Ben to David, his expression softening as he met David's eyes. He shook his head with a slight smile, then turned back to Ben. "Excuse me, mister," Harold said, his tone polite but firm. "This family is a very valuable guest." Ben's face paled slightly. "I was just trying to follow the rules, sir," he stammered. "What do you mean by valuable guest?" "Mr. Harold took a deep breath and let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "David here is one of the biggest donors who helped build this pool," he said, gesturing to David. "Without his contributions, we wouldn't have been able to create this facility." Ben's face turned white as a sheet. He stuttered for a moment, clearly at a loss for words. Jaden looked up at his father with wide eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that his father was someone important. David just gave Mr. Harold a small, modest nod, his smile barely there, as if to say, "It's not a big deal." But for Jaden, it was. His father had built this pool he hadn't known, but suddenly he felt a surge of pride. "I don't ever want to see you discriminate like that again, mister," Harold said sternly to Ben. "This pool was built for everyone, and we owe this family a great debt." Ben was still frozen, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for the right words. He finally nodded mutely and stepped back toward his station, retreating to his seat, clearly humiliated. David turned to Jaden with a smile. "Ready for your lesson, bud?" Jaden beamed up at him, his excitement restored, and together they headed toward the pool, leaving Ben behind to grapple with the uncomfortable truth he had just learned. The water felt cool and refreshing against Jaden's skin as he dipped his toes into the pool. He stood at the edge, his heart racing, a mix of nerves and excitement filling him. His father stood nearby, watching with a proud but calm smile. The instructor, a young woman named Amy, greeted Jaden warmly. "Are you ready to become a fish today?" she teased, crouching beside him. Jaden grinned. "I think so." David, standing back, smiled as he watched his son's eagerness. It was a small moment, but after the morning's events, it felt like a victory. Jaden deserved this joy, and David was determined that nothing and no one would ruin it for him. From across the pool, David noticed Ben still sitting at his station, glancing over at them occasionally. The man's posture was stiff, his expression sour. David couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for him. Ben had made a mistake, but he wasn't the only one who harbored these quiet prejudices in their town. This was a subtle battle David had faced before, though he rarely spoke about it. As Jaden began his lesson, splashing around and learning to float with Amy's help, David sat down on one of the benches by the pool, reflecting on the events of the day. He hadn't come to the pool looking for a confrontation. In fact, he had wanted the opposite, a quiet day with his son. But sometimes life had other plans. Jaden's laughter echoed across the pool as he paddled through the shallow end, buoyed by the instructor's patient guidance. David sat on a nearby bench, watching his son's small victories with a quiet pride. Despite the morning's unpleasantness with Ben, the day had taken a positive turn, and Jaden's joy was contagious. But David couldn't completely shake the encounter with Ben from his mind. The dismissive hostility in Ben's voice, the assumption that they didn't belong, it wasn't new. It was a quiet, insidious type of exclusion that David had experienced before, though he'd learned not to let it take root in his spirit. He knew that not everyone in the world had malice in their hearts, but many carried unexamined biases that could fester into prejudice. Across the pool, Ben sat rigidly at his post, casting occasional glances at David and Jaden. His earlier confidence had been replaced by a palpable discomfort. Ben felt the weight of Mr. Harold's rebuke and the shame of realizing he had misjudged David, someone who had given so much to the very community that Ben served. His mistake gnawed at him, but the deeper pain came from realizing how easily he had let his own prejudices cloud his judgment. Ben's thoughts churned, and finally he couldn't take it any longer. Standing up, he straightened his uniform and approached the pool's edge where David sat. "Excuse me," Ben said, his voice hesitant. David looked up, calm but expectant. Ben shifted awkwardly, clearly struggling with the words. "I just wanted to say that I'm really sorry about earlier. I misunderstood. I didn't know who you were." David nodded slowly, then gestured to the empty seat next to him. "Sit down." Ben hesitated but eventually complied, sinking onto the bench. For a moment, they sat in silence, the sound of children splashing filling the space between them. "It's not about who I am," David said after a pause. "That's not why what happened this morning matters." Ben frowned. "What do you mean?" David turned slightly to face him. "I'm not looking for special treatment. I helped fund this pool because I believe it should be a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are. This facility was never meant to be exclusive." Ben shifted uncomfortably, guilt pressing down on him. "I didn't mean he started," but David gently interrupted. "I know. But it's important to understand that everyone who walks through those doors deserves the same respect and courtesy, regardless of what they look like or how much money they have. That's why this pool was built." Ben glanced down at his hands, feeling the shame wash over him again. I don't know why I acted like that. I was just following the rules, I guess." David's smile was kind, but there was a depth to his gaze. "We all make mistakes, Ben. What matters is what we do after we've made them." For the first time, Ben truly met David's eyes, and in that moment, he saw no anger or resentment, just understanding. It was a humbling realization. "Thank you," Ben said quietly. I'll do better." David nodded, then looked back toward the pool where Jaden was kicking his legs enthusiastically, trying to master the next stroke. "That's all anyone can ask," David said softly. Days passed, and while Ben continued his duties at the pool, something inside him had shifted. Every time he glanced at the families swimming or the children laughing, he thought back to David's words. The shame of his earlier behavior lingered, but now it was tempered with a growing determination to be better. He had started treating every guest with the same respect, making an effort to be welcoming, even going out of his way to help those he might have once overlooked. It wasn't easy to confront the biases he hadn't even realized he held, but Ben knew this was a chance to change, and he didn't want to waste it. Meanwhile, David continued bringing Jaden to the pool for lessons. Each time they visited, Ben felt a knot of guilt tighten in his chest, but David never treated him with anything other than kindness. If anything, his demeanor seemed to say, "I've already forgiven you." But Ben hadn't yet forgiven himself. One afternoon, as Jaden finished his lesson and splashed around in the shallow end, David sat by the pool, reading. Ben, unable to ignore the gnawing thoughts in his head, approached again. "Can I ask you something?" Ben ventured, standing at the edge of the pool. David looked up, setting his book aside. "Of course." Ben hesitated, but the question that had been building inside him for days finally spilled out. "Why did you help build this pool? I mean, you don't seem like someone who wants attention. So why make such a big contribution?" David's expression softened. "You're right. I didn't do it for attention. I did it for Jaden. My son loves the water, and I wanted him to have a place where he could swim and grow up surrounded by all kinds of people. I wanted him to see that a community isn't made up of just one kind of person, it's a mix, and that's what makes it strong." Ben nodded slowly, absorbing this. He hadn't considered the deeper purpose behind the pool before. To him, it had just been a job. But now he was beginning to see it as something much more. "But there's more to it than that," David continued. "When we were helping fund the construction, there were people who didn't want certain families coming here. They thought the pool should only be for certain groups. I couldn't stand by and let that happen." Ben's brow furrowed. "People really said that?" David nodded gravely. "Yes, and I knew that if we allowed those ideas to take root, this pool would be no different than any other place where people feel excluded. I wanted this to be a space where anyone, no matter their background, could feel safe and welcomed." Ben was quiet for a moment, processing David's words. He felt a tightness in his chest that wasn't just guilt anymore. It was the realization of how wrong he had been. He had stood on the wrong side of this unspoken divide without even realizing it. David stood up, stretching his legs. "We all have to confront our pasts, Ben," he said, his tone gentle. But it's what we do next that matters. Ben swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. I've made a lot of mistakes, he admitted. But I want to do better. I want to make this place what it was meant to be. David gave him an encouraging smile. You're already on the right path. The next weekend, the pool was unusually busy. Word had spread about the incident with Ben and David, but it wasn't until 2 reporters showed up with cameras that the story truly gained traction. They were from the local news station, and they had caught wind of the quiet donor who had helped build the pool and the controversy surrounding the incident. David had never been one for the spotlight, and when the reporters approached him at the pool, he tried to wave them off politely. There's really nothing to report here, David said, uncomfortable under the camera's gaze. I just wanted to swim with my son. But the reporters persisted, eager to uncover the full story. Mr. Harold told us you played a major role in building this pool, one of them said, microphone in hand. Can you tell us more about why you got involved? David sighed, glancing over at Mr. Harold, who stood nearby, watching with an approving nod. David knew the story was important, but he wasn't eager to make a spectacle of the situation, especially considering Ben's role in it. The man had made a mistake, yes, but David didn't believe in public shaming. If you want to tell this story, David said, addressing the reporters, then just tell the facts. Yes, Ben made a mistake, but that's not what matters here. What's important is the purpose of this pool. The reporters exchanged a glance, slightly thrown off by David's measured response. And what is that purpose? One of them asked. David stood up, looking directly into the camera. This pool was built to bring people together. It's a place where everyone, no matter their background, can come and feel welcomed. It's about unity, not division. He glanced over at Ben, who was standing nervously in the background, clearly afraid that his mistake would be broadcast to the world. But David had no intention of making him a villain. And everyone makes mistakes, David continued, his voice firm but compassionate. But what's more important than the mistakes we make is how we learn from them. The reporters, sensing the emotional weight of David's words, shifted their focus, recognizing the deeper story. They started asking questions about the pool's mission, about its role in the community, and about the future. As the cameras rolled, Ben stood off to the side, his stomach in knots. He had expected to be humiliated, but instead, David had defended him. David had chosen not to focus on the error Ben had made, but on the bigger picture, on the message of unity and the chance for redemption. For the first time in a long time, Ben felt like he could breathe. The buzz around the story of David, Jaden, and Ben had spread quickly. Local news coverage had put the spotlight on the pool, and the story began to take on a life of its own, with people across the city discussing the incident. While the news reports had focused on David's calm response and the pool's mission of unity, Ben had been portrayed as a man who made a serious mistake but was given a second chance. For Ben, that second chance was something he hadn't been expecting. After the reporters left, he had felt an overwhelming sense of relief that David had chosen not to humiliate him. But more than relief, there was a growing sense of responsibility. David had offered him grace, but now Ben had to prove that he deserved it. The next day, Ben arrived at the pool earlier than usual. He wanted to make sure everything was perfect, to be ready for anyone who walked through the doors. This wasn't just a job for him anymore, it was his chance to make amends, to turn his mistake into something that could change him for the better. As families started to arrive, Ben greeted each one with a smile, going out of his way to make everyone feel welcome. It wasn't forced or insincere, he genuinely wanted to prove that he had learned something valuable. He wasn't going to let his prejudices, even the ones he hadn't consciously realized, guide him any longer. Midway through the morning, David and Jaden arrived at the pool. As they approached, Ben walked over, a little nervous but determined to make things right. David saw him coming and nodded with a warm smile. "Morning, Ben?" David greeted. "Morning," Ben replied, his voice steady but earnest. "I just wanted to thank you again for what you said yesterday. You didn't have to defend me, but you did. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I want you to know that I'm going to do better. I want this place to be exactly what you envisioned, a place where everyone feels welcome." David nodded, appreciating Ben's sincerity. "I know you will. It's all about taking responsibility and moving forward. Jaden, who had been listening quietly, looked up at Ben and smiled. "Are you going to help me get better at swimming?" he asked, his voice full of innocence and curiosity. Ben chuckled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "You bet I will, kiddo. We'll make you the best swimmer in town." Jaden beamed, and David's smile widened. It was a simple exchange, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. The pool's reputation had grown in the weeks following the media coverage, drawing more people from different parts of the city. It wasn't just a recreational space anymore. It was becoming a symbol of community and inclusion. Families from all walks of life gathered there, and each day the pool buzzed with the sound of laughter, splashing, and the hum of conversation. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, Mr. Harold, the pool's owner, gathered his staff for a quick meeting. He stood by the poolside, looking out at the diverse crowd enjoying the water, his heart swelling with pride. "We've come a long way," Harold said, addressing the group, "but I think we can do more. I want to organize a special event, a community gathering, to celebrate what this pool stands for." The staff exchanged curious glances, and Harold continued. "This pool was built with the vision of bringing people together, regardless of their backgrounds. I think we should host an event that celebrates that unity, that reminds people why this place exists." Ben stood at the back of the group, listening intently. He had been quietly trying to improve himself since the incident with David. But now, this event felt like a chance to show the community that he had changed. It was an opportunity to take part in something bigger than just his job. "It'll help," Ben said, stepping forward. The staff turned to look at him, surprised but supportive. Ben had been quieter than usual since the news story broke, but it was clear to everyone that he was making a genuine effort to turn things around. Harold smiled, nodding at Ben. "Glad to have you on board. We're going to need all the help we can get." Together, the staff began planning the event, a day of celebration, swimming and activities that would bring the community together. Flyers were made, social media posts were shared, and soon, word of the event spread far and wide. David, though modest and humble, was asked to attend as a special guest. At first he hesitated, not wanting to draw attention to himself, but after some convincing from Harold and Ben, he agreed. This wasn't about him, he realized, it was about the message the pool stood for. The day of the event arrived, and the pool was more crowded than it had ever been. Families from all over the city filled the area, excited to be part of something special. There were games for the kids, swimming races, and even a live band playing upbeat tunes that echoed across the water. Ben had been working tirelessly all morning, making sure everything ran smoothly. He greeted guests, handed out towels, and helped coordinate the events. Every time he saw a new face, he made sure to welcome them warmly, knowing how much those small gestures mattered. David and Jaden arrived in the early afternoon, and as soon as they stepped through the gates, they were greeted by a wave of applause. It took David by surprise. He hadn't expected such a response, but the community had come to see him as a symbol of what the pool represented. He smiled and gave a humble wave, guiding Jaden toward the poolside. "Mr. Harold took the stage near the center of the pool area, microphone in hand. The crowd quieted down as he began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," Harold began, his voice carrying across the water. "This pool was built to bring people together, and today we're celebrating that unity." He paused, scanning the crowd with a proud smile. "But none of this would have been possible without David," Harold continued, gesturing to where David stood with Jaden. "David's vision and generosity helped create this space, and his commitment to our community is something we should all be grateful for." The crowd erupted into applause again, and David, though clearly embarrassed by the attention, smiled and gave a small nod. "But today isn't just about the past," Harold said, his tone growing more serious. "It's about the future. It's about making sure that this pool continues to be a place where everyone is welcome, no matter who they are or where they come from." Harold's eyes shifted toward Ben, who stood at the edge of the crowd watching. "And it's about learning from our mistakes and making things right." The crowd turned to look at Ben, who felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks. For a moment, He thought Harold might be calling him out publicly, but then Harold smiled warmly. Ben has shown us what it means to grow, to learn, and to change for the better, Harold said. And that's exactly what this pool represents, a place where we can all come together, learn from one another, and become stronger as a community. The crowd clapped again, and Ben felt an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. He hadn't expected this. He had been bracing himself for judgment, but instead he had been met with acceptance. David walked over to Ben, extending a hand. "You're doing good work," David said simply, his voice full of sincerity. Ben shook his hand, his throat tight with emotion. "Thanks. That means a lot." As the day went on, the event became a huge success. Families mingled, children laughed, and the pool buzzed with life. It wasn't just a fun day at the pool, it was a celebration of what the space had come to symbolize: unity, inclusivity, and hope. Ben spent the rest of the afternoon helping wherever he could, but for the first time, he wasn't just focused on his duties. He was focused on the people. He took time to chat with families, learn their names, and make sure everyone felt welcomed. At one point, Jaden swam over to him, grinning. "You should come in the water with us." Ben laughed, shaking his head. "I think he'll leave the swimming to you pros." Jaden giggled and splashed away, leaving Ben with a smile on his face. Watching Jaden and the other children play in the water, Ben realized just how important this pool had become, not just for the kids, but for the entire community. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a place where real change could happen, where people could come together and leave their differences behind. As the sun began to set and the event wound down, Harold took the stage one last time. "Before we all go home, I want to leave you with one last thought," he said, his voice full of emotion. "This pool isn't just a place to swim. It's a place to grow. It's a place to become better together." The crowd cheered, and as the final round of applause echoed through the air, David, Ben, and Jaden stood together, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the pool. It had been a long journey, full of mistakes, lessons, and growth. But in that moment, surrounded by laughter and light, they knew that they had built something truly special, symbol of hope for the future. A week after the community event, the pool had become the centerpiece of conversations all over the city. People spoke of the day as a turning point, not just for the facility, but for the community itself. The story of David, Jaden, and Ben had taken on a deeper meaning. It had become a symbol of forgiveness, growth, and the power of unity. Mr. Harold, ever the visionary, knew this moment couldn't pass without something more permanent to mark the change. He had been quietly working behind the scenes, organizing a ceremony that would not only celebrate the pool's growing role in the community, but also honor the people who made it possible. The day of the ceremony arrived, and once again the pool was packed with families and neighbors. This time, the gathering had an even larger turnout than the previous event, and a stage had been set up near the poolside for what was promised to be a special announcement. David arrived with Jaden as usual, but something felt different this time. The pool seemed to hum with an excited energy, and as they walked through the entrance, they were greeted with warm smiles, handshakes, and nods of respect from everyone they passed. David, always humble, smiled politely, still slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Ben was already there, moving through the crowd with purpose. He had taken on a more active role at the pool since the community event, and his confidence had grown. No longer weighed down by the mistakes of his past, Ben had found a sense of pride in his work, and was eager to see what Mr. Harold had planned. As the sun reached its peak in the sky, Mr. Harold took the stage. He tapped the microphone, and the chatter of the crowd quieted as all eyes turned toward him. "Thank you all for coming today, Mr. Harold began, his voice full of warmth. "We're here because this pool has become more than just a place to swim. It's become a symbol of what our community can be when we come together, when we learn from each other, and when we choose understanding over division." The crowd clapped politely, and Harold continued. "But today, I want to take a moment to recognize someone who has made all of this possible. Someone who has not only helped build this pool, but has also shown us what it means to lead with humility, forgiveness, and strength. David, standing near the back of the crowd, suddenly felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. He had a good idea of where this was going, and though he appreciated the sentiment, he never liked being the center of attention. Harold's eyes found David in the crowd, and he smiled. "David," he said, gesturing for him to come forward, "please join us up here." David shook his head slightly, but Jaden gave him an encouraging nudge. "Go on, Dad," Jaden said, his eyes bright with pride. With a deep breath, David made his way through the crowd, climbing the steps to the stage. The audience clapped loudly as he approached, but David's humility kept him from fully embracing the moment. He nodded to Harold, who continued speaking. "David's contributions to this pool have been nothing short of remarkable," Harold said. "Not just financially, but also in the way he's shown us what it means to be part of a community. His vision for this pool was always about more than just a place to swim. It was about creating a space where everyone could feel welcomed and respected." The crowd erupted into applause, and David, feeling the weight of the moment, gave a modest wave. "But that's not all," Harold said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Today, we want to make sure that David's vision lives on, that it becomes part of the very fabric of this community." Harold paused for dramatic effect, letting the crowd hang on his words. Then, with a wide smile, he made the announcement that would change everything. From this day forward, this pool will be known as the David Foster Community Pool. The crowd erupted into wild applause, cheers rising up from every corner of the space. David stood there, stunned. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he quickly turned to Harold, shaking his head. "That's not necessary," David protested, his voice soft but insistent. Harold placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than necessary, David. It's a symbol for everyone to remember what this pool stands for. It's a reminder of your generosity, your forgiveness, and your belief in unity." David, overcome with emotion, blinked back tears. He had never expected this. He had never wanted recognition for what he had done. He just wanted a place for Jaden to swim, a place for the community to come together. And now this pool would bear his name. The crowd continued to cheer as David, still in shock, looked out at the sea of faces, each one smiling back at him. His heart swelled with gratitude, but also with humility. This wasn't just about him. It was about the entire community and what they had built together. As the applause finally began to die down, David turned to Harold with a quiet smile. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the lingering cheers. "But you know, this was never about me. It was always about the community." Harold nodded, understanding David's sentiment. "I know," he said. "But you gave us the chance to build this community, and that's something worth celebrating." David stepped back from the microphone, feeling the overwhelming emotions still swirling inside him. But before he could leave the stage, something unexpected happened. Ben, who had been watching from the crowd, slowly made his way forward. He had been standing there, quietly absorbing the ceremony, but now he felt a deep need to say something. This moment wasn't just about David, it was about the lessons they had all learned together. As Ben approached the stage, Harold handed him the microphone, and the crowd grew quiet again, curious about what he had to say. "I wasn't sure if I should speak today," Ben began, his voice a little shaky. "But after everything that's happened, I feel like I need to." David watched him closely, his eyes soft with understanding. Ben had come a long way since that first day, and now, standing on the stage, he was ready to face the crowd with honesty. "When I first met David and Jaden," Ben continued, "I made a big mistake. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I treated them in a way that wasn't fair. I was wrong, and I know that now." A hush fell over the crowd as Ben spoke, his words raw with vulnerability. "But what I learned from David and from this whole experience is that we all have the capacity to change. We all make mistakes, but it's what we do after those mistakes that matters." Ben paused, looking out at the crowd, then back at David. "David could have humiliated me. He could have held a grudge. But instead, he forgave me, and he gave me a chance to do better. And that's something you'll never forget." The crowd clapped softly, a gentle murmur of support for Ben's heartfelt admission. "I just want to say thank you," Ben finished, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to grow, and thank you for showing me what it really means to be part of a community." David stepped forward, placing a hand on Ben's shoulder. "You've already made things right, Ben. We all make mistakes, but it takes courage to admit them, and even more courage to change." The crowd clapped louder this time, the tension of the moment lifting as Ben smiled gratefully. He hadn't expected such forgiveness and grace, but it had transformed him, and now, standing on the stage, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. As the ceremony continued, the energy in the air shifted from one of reflection to celebration. The pool had officially been renamed, and the community gathered to honor not just David, but the ideals that the pool represented. It was a place of healing, growth, and unity, something that was needed now more than ever. Jaden, watching from the sidelines, felt a surge of pride for his father. He had always known David was a good man, but now he truly understood just how much his father had done for their community. This pool, this place that had brought so much joy, was more than just water and wall. It was a symbol of love and kindness, something that Jaden would carry with him for the rest of his life. After the ceremony, people lingered by the pool, chatting and celebrating. The weight of the past weeks seemed to have lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of togetherness. Ben moved through the crowd, shaking hands and offering warm smiles to everyone he met. He had found a renewed sense of purpose in his work, and now, more than ever, he was determined to make the pool a place where everyone felt welcome. David stood by the edge of the water, watching Jaden splash around with some of the other kids. Harold joined him, leaning on his cane as they both watched the sun dip low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the pool. "You did a good thing here," Harold said softly. David smiled. "We did a good thing," he corrected. "This wouldn't have happened without all of us." Harold chuckled. "You always were humble, but I think we both know that your heart is what made this pool what it is today." David didn't argue. Instead, he let the warmth of the moment wash over him. It wasn't about taking credit, it never had been. It was about what they had built together, and how it would live on for future generations. As the last rays of sunlight reflected off the water, David felt a deep sense of peace. This pool, now bearing his name, would forever be a symbol of hope, forgiveness, and unity. And for Jaden, it would be a reminder of his father's quiet strength, a strength that came not from power, but from kindness and love. 1 year later, the David Foster Community Pool had become a fixture in the neighborhood. Families came from all over the city to swim, play, and enjoy the space. It wasn't just a pool anymore, it was a symbol of unity, a place where people of all backgrounds could come together. Ben had continued his journey of self-improvement, now one of the most beloved figures at the pool. He greeted every guest with warmth and made sure that the pool remained a welcoming place for all. His redemption had become a personal mission, and each day he was reminded of the lesson he had learned from David, that everyone deserved a second chance. David and Jaden still visited the pool regularly, though now Jaden was an accomplished swimmer, confidently diving into the deep end and racing his friends across the lanes. Every time they came, they were met with smiles and waves from the community, a quiet acknowledgement of the impact they had made. As the seasons passed, the pool continued to thrive, a beacon of hope and inclusivity. And though David remained humble, never seeking the spotlight, the legacy he had built would live on for generations. It was more than just a pool. It was a symbol of what could happen when people came together, when they chose forgiveness over resentment, and when they opened their hearts to one another. And in the heart of the city, the David Foster Community Pool would forever stand as a testament to the power of unity. A year had passed since the pool had been renamed the David Foster Community Pool, and during that time, it had become a beacon of togetherness for the city. What was once just a modern facility for swimming had transformed into something far greater, a symbol of unity, healing, and progress. Ben, the attendant who had once been the source of division, was now a central figure in this transformation. He had become known as the heart of the pool, always greeting guests with a kind smile, making sure everyone, no matter their background, felt welcomed. His personal journey from regret to redemption had become an inspiration for many who visited the pool. and his story was often shared by those who had witnessed his change firsthand. Each day, as families arrived, Ben made sure to go out of his way to talk to people, remembering names, asking about their kids, and making everyone feel like they belonged. He had learned that redemption wasn't a single act, it was a continuous process of striving to be better, to learn from mistakes, and to lift others up. The pool for Ben was no longer just a job. It was a calling, a place where he could give back and make amends. Jaden, now 8 years old, had grown into a strong, confident swimmer. He often spent his afternoons at the pool, practicing his strokes or playing with his friends. He had developed a natural grace in the water, and sometimes he would even help younger kids, showing them how to float or kick their legs properly. Whenever Jaden was in the pool, he felt a sense of pride, not just because his father's name was etched on the entrance sign, but because he knew the story behind it. He had watched his father handle adversity with patience and grace, and he had seen how kindness could change people for the better. Jaden's experiences at the pool had shaped him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. But he knew that his father's quiet strength had left a lasting impression on him. One summer afternoon, as Jaden swam with a group of kids, he overheard a little boy who was struggling to stay afloat. His mother, sitting on the poolside, seemed anxious as she watched, unsure if her son was ready to be in the water. Without hesitation, Jaden swam over and offered his help. "Hey, want me to show you how to float?" he asked, smiling warmly. The boy, clearly nervous, nodded. Jaden gently held his back and helped him position his body, patiently guiding him through the process. After a few minutes, the boy was floating on his own, his face beaming with pride. "See, you've got it," Jaden said, giving the boy a high five. The mother, watching from the side, smiled gratefully at Jaden. And as Jaden swam away, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It was moments like these that reminded Jaden of his father's words, "Everyone deserves a chance." Whether it was learning to swim, finding forgiveness, or overcoming a mistake, Jaden knew that what mattered most was the willingness to help others and build something better together. For Ben, each day at the pool felt like another step on his journey toward full redemption. The mistakes he had made, the hurtful assumptions he had once held, no longer weighed him down the way they used to. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he had come and how much he had learned. Every now and then, people would approach him, still recognizing him from the viral story that had circulated over a year ago. Some would ask him how he had managed to change so drastically, while others would simply express their appreciation for his humility and growth. Ben always responded with the same humility that David had shown him. "I learned from the best," Ben would say with a smile. "David taught me that it's not about where you start, it's about where you end up and how you get there." One day, after a particularly busy afternoon at the pool, Ben sat down on a bench to catch his breath. David, who had brought Jaden for his daily swim, joined him, sitting down beside him in the fading evening light. "You've been doing great work, Ben," David said, looking out at the pool filled with families laughing and playing. "The community really sees the difference." Ben nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I wouldn't have gotten here without your help, David. You didn't have to show me kindness that day, but you did. And it's changed everything for me." David turned to him, his eyes filled with sincerity. "It wasn't just about that day, Ben. It's about what you've done since then. You've earned this." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset reflect off the water's surface. Ben had finally come to terms with his past, and now the future felt wide open, full of possibility and purpose. As the months passed, the David Foster Community Pool continued to thrive. Families from all over the city would gather there, not just for the swimming, but for the sense of belonging that the pool offered. It had become a safe haven, a place where diversity was celebrated and where people could learn from one another. Mr. Harold, though no longer as active in the day-to-day operations, often visited the pool just to see how things were going. He would stand at the entrance, watching with pride as the community he had helped build flourished. One day, he decided to organize another event, a one-year anniversary celebration of the renaming of the pool. It would be a day to reflect on the progress they had made and to look forward to the future. David, of course, was asked to be the guest of honor, though he still found it difficult to accept the attention. Jaden, now more mature and aware of what his father had done, was excited to stand by his side, proud of the legacy his family had created. The day of the anniversary celebration was bright and sunny, and the pool was buzzing with activity. People from all corners of the community came to take part, enjoying the games, food, and music that had been organized for the occasion. As the festivities continued, Harold once again took the stage to address the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," Harold began, his voice steady and full of emotion. "1 year ago, we renamed this pool after David Foster to honor not just his contributions, but the values he has stood for: unity, kindness, and inclusion." The crowd clapped, their applause warm and heartfelt. But today, we're here to celebrate more than just a name. We're here to celebrate what this pool has become: a place for all of us, no matter where we come from or who we are. This pool represents the best of our community, and that's because of the people who come here every day. David, standing near the back with Jaden, watched quietly as Harold continued his speech. "And finally," Harold said, his tone shifting slightly, "I want to acknowledge someone else today. Someone who has shown us all what it means to change, to grow, and to make amends." The crowd turned as Harold gestured toward Ben, who stood near the entrance, surprised to find himself the focus of attention. "Ben," Harold said warmly, "your journey has been an inspiration to all of us. You've shown that no matter where we start, we can always choose to do better. And for that, we thank you." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ben, feeling a lump rise in his throat, nodded gratefully. He hadn't expected this acknowledgement, but it meant the world to him. As the anniversary celebration wound down and families began to head home, David, Jaden, and Ben sat together near the pool's edge, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon. "Dad," Jaden said quietly, "do you think the pool will always be this special?" David smiled at his son. "I think it will, Jaden, but it's up to all of us to make sure it stays that way." Jaden nodded thoughtfully, understanding that the pool wasn't just a building, it reflected the community's heart and soul. Ben, listening to their conversation, felt a deep sense of peace. He had been given a second chance, and now he was determined to spend the rest of his life giving back to the place and the people who had helped him find redemption. As they sat together, watching the pool ripple softly in the evening light, they knew that the future was bright. The David Foster Community Pool would continue to stand as a symbol of hope, unity, and the power of forgiveness for generations to come. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of friendship and family, they knew that they had truly built something special, a legacy that would last a lifetime. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey with David, Jaden, Ben, and the entire community at the David Foster Community Pool. If you enjoyed this story about unity, redemption, and the power of kindness, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let's continue to spread messages of hope, compassion, and the power of second chances. Your support helps us create even more meaningful content, and we appreciate every single one of you. It wasn't easy. There were days when James felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was trying to change. But he knew that every step forward, no matter how small, was progress. Meanwhile, David and Rachel continued their work as advocates for housing equality. They spoke at community forums, raised awareness about discriminatory practices in the real estate industry, and pushed for legislative changes that would protect future home buyers from the same struggles they had faced. Their story became an inspiration for others, a reminder that change was possible even in the face of systemic barriers. And while the fight for equality was far from over, David and Rachel knew that they had made a meaningful impact. Months passed, and James slowly began to rebuild both his business and his reputation. He had lost clients, there was no denying that. Some of his wealthiest, most exclusive clients had moved on to other agents, uncomfortable with the new direction James was taking. But he didn't mind. In their place, He had gained new clients, people who had been overlooked or ignored for far too long. Families who wanted nothing more than a fair chance at owning a home. One day, as he sat in his office reviewing the details of a new sale, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Rachel Smith. "James, we wanted to thank you for the changes you've made. It hasn't gone unnoticed. We're glad to see that you're taking real steps to make things right. Keep going, it matters. Rachel and David." James stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a start. A sign that the path he was on was the right one. For the first time in a long time, James felt hopeful. Several months after the sale of the Glenview estate, James Delaney found himself in a very different position than he had ever imagined. His business was no longer the exclusive, luxury-focused real estate powerhouse it had once been. Instead, it had become a place where families of all backgrounds came for guidance and assistance. His reputation among the ultra-elite had taken a hit, but his business was growing in a new and meaningful way. His clientele had become more diverse, with many new clients appreciating the change in his approach and his commitment to fairness. James had shifted his focus toward affordable housing and equal access initiatives, using his skills to help people who had been marginalized in the market. It was a long road, but he was starting to see the results. He had begun offering workshops for first-time homebuyers, particularly in communities of color, to help families understand the home buying process and avoid the traps of predatory lending. One afternoon, as James was reviewing files at his desk, his assistant Linda walked in, a bit hesitant. "James, there's someone here to see you. You might want to take this one in private," she said, her voice low. James raised an eyebrow, curious but not alarmed. He had faced his share of difficult conversations in recent months and had learned to handle them. "Who is it?" he asked. "It's David Smith," she said. James' heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen David or Rachel since the sale closed, though he had exchanged emails with them. He had been expecting this moment for a long time, wondering if it would ever come. Now here it was. "Send him in," James said, steeling himself for whatever the conversation might bring. David entered the room a moment later, his tall frame and calm demeanor filling the space. He looked around briefly before meeting James' eyes. There was no animosity in his gaze, just a quiet, almost cautious resolve. "David, it's good to see you," James said, standing to shake his hand. He felt the tension in the air, but was determined to meet the moment with sincerity. "Good to see you too, James," David replied, shaking his hand firmly but with no animosity. He took a seat across from James, leaning back slightly as if measuring his words carefully. For a moment, there was silence. James knew that David wasn't the type to mince words or offer meaningless pleasantries, and he respected that. He decided to speak first. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I want you to know that it's changed the way I look at everything. My business, my decisions, all of it. I know I didn't just hurt you and Rachel. I damaged a lot of trust, and I'm working hard to rebuild that." David nodded slowly. "I've seen the changes you've made. Rachel and I have talked about it a lot, and we're glad you're taking steps to do better. But I didn't come here to talk about the past. I came to talk about the future." James blinked in surprise. "The future?" David smiled faintly, though there was still a seriousness in his expression. "Yeah, you've started to make a difference, and that's important. But there's a lot more work to be done. I came here because I think we can help each other." James was intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "We've been working with a few organizations that focus on housing equality and economic justice," David explained. "These are groups that work to help families who've been pushed out of neighborhoods or denied the same opportunities as others. They need someone with your expertise to help navigate the system and open doors that have been closed for too long." James leaned forward, listening intently. This was exactly the kind of work he had wanted to get involved in ever since his conversation with Michael Brooks. "I'd be honored to help in any way I can," James said. "I've already been trying to shift my focus toward helping underrepresented families, but there's still so much I don't know. Working with people like you and Rachel would make a real impact." David nodded, seeming to appreciate James' willingness to learn. "That's what I'm hoping for. It's not just about selling houses, James. It's about making sure people have access to opportunities that were denied to them for generations. James felt a swell of gratitude for this opportunity to work alongside people who had every right to distance themselves from him, but were instead offering him a path forward. "I'm all in," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever you need, I'm ready." For the first time in what felt like years, James felt like he was on the right path where his work wasn't just about commissions or prestige, but about creating real change. While James was navigating his new role in the real estate world, David and Rachel Smith had been making their own strides toward promoting housing equality. Rachel's legal work had expanded beyond her law firm, as she began taking on more pro bono cases focused on fighting housing discrimination. Her expertise in civil rights law gave her the tools to take on the subtler forms of discrimination that often went unchallenged in court. One evening, Rachel sat at her home office desk, reviewing a case involving a family who had been denied a mortgage based on vague and arbitrary criteria. She was building a strong argument, one that could potentially set a new precedent in the fight for equal housing rights. David entered the room quietly, carrying a cup of tea for her. "How's it going?" David asked, setting the cup down on the desk. Rachel smiled gratefully, rubbing her eyes as she glanced at the clock. "Good. It's just this is one case, one family out of so many. Sometimes it feels overwhelming." David nodded, understanding her frustration. "I know. But you're making a difference, Rach. You're helping families who wouldn't have had a chance otherwise." Rachel sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It just feels like the system is so stacked against them. Even when we win one case, there's another family going through the same thing." David sat down next to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "That's why we have to keep pushing. This is bigger than just us or our house. We're fighting for something that affects generations of people." Rachel nodded, her resolve returning. "You're right, and I'm not giving up." In addition to her legal work, Rachel had begun organizing community forums, bringing together families who had experienced discrimination in the housing market. She wanted to create a space where people could share their stories and build a network of support. These forums became a place for people to strategize, to fight back against the barriers they faced, and to demand change. David, on the other hand, had used his influence in the tech world to push for more diversity and inclusion in corporate housing policies. He began speaking at conferences and tech summits about the importance of fair housing practices, encouraging other business leaders to support affordable housing initiatives. His company started a new grant program that provided financial assistance to underrepresented families looking to buy homes in higher-income neighborhoods, helping them overcome some of the financial barriers that had kept them out for so long. Together, David and Rachel were building a legacy not just for their family, but for countless others who would follow in their footsteps. Their new home wasn't just a symbol of their success, it was a reminder of the fight for justice that still needed to be won. As the months passed, James Delaney's involvement in housing equality deepened. He worked closely with the organizations David had connected him with, offering his expertise to families who were navigating the complex real estate market. He also began attending more public forums and discussions on housing rights, learning from people whose experiences were vastly different from his own. One day, as he was leading a workshop for first-time homebuyers in a low-income neighborhood, James was struck by the sheer number of people who had been pushed aside by the same system he had once thrived in. For years, he had been part of the problem, shutting out people who didn't fit the mold of what he considered acceptable buyers. But now, seeing these families who had every right to own a home, he understood just how much damage his old ways had caused. After the workshop, a young woman approached him, holding a folder filled with papers. "Mr. Delaney, thank you so much for this session," she said, her voice nervous but grateful. "I've been trying to buy a house for months, but every time I apply for a mortgage, something goes wrong. I didn't realize how much of the process I didn't understand until today." James smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I'm glad I could help. Buying a home is a big step, and it can be overwhelming, but don't give up. You deserve this." As the woman walked away, James felt a surge of pride. This was what his work should have been about all along, helping people achieve their dreams, not standing in their way. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he could build a better future. Months turned into a year, and the world around James, David, and Rachel continued to change. Their efforts, along with those of countless others, had begun to make a real impact on the community. Housing discrimination cases were being fought in court, and new policies were being implemented to ensure that all families had access to the housing market, regardless of race or background. James' business had transformed into something entirely new. He wasn't the top real estate agent for the city's wealthy elite anymore, but that didn't bother him. He was doing work that mattered, work that made a difference in people's lives. He had become a trusted advisor for families who had been overlooked for far too long, and he had built a reputation for fairness, integrity, and inclusion. As for David and Rachel, their advocacy continued to grow. They had become leaders in the fight for housing equality, using their voices and their platforms to demand change at both the local and national levels. Their journey had started with a dream of buying a home, but it had turned into something far greater, a movement for justice, fairness, and equal opportunity. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, David and Rachel stood on the back porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The house that had once been a symbol of their struggle was now a place of peace, a place where they could build the future they had always dreamed of. Rachel leaned her head on David's shoulder, her voice soft but filled with determination. "We've come so far." David nodded, his heart full. "And we've still got a long way to go." Rachel smiled. "But we're ready." Together, they walked toward their children, hand in hand, ready to continue the fight for a better future, not just for themselves, but for everyone. As time passed, the seeds of change that David, Rachel, and James had planted began to bear fruit. New housing policies were enacted, making it easier for minority families to break into neighborhoods that had once been off-limits. Real estate agents across the city began reevaluating their practices, inspired by the transformation they saw in James' business. And families who had once been denied the chance to own a home were finally getting the keys to their future. James Delaney had become a different man who was proud of the work he was doing, not because it brought him wealth or prestige, but because it made the world a little more just. David and Rachel continued their fight, knowing that there was still much to be done, but also knowing that they had made a difference. Their story had inspired others, showing that with determination, courage, and the support of a community, real change was possible. In the end, the fight for housing equality wasn't just about houses or neighborhoods, it was about people. People who deserved a chance to build a life for themselves and their families, regardless of where they came from or the color of their skin. And as the years passed, David, Rachel, and James knew that their work would continue, leaving behind a legacy of hope, justice, and opportunity for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, justice, and the fight for equality, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon, so you never miss an upload, and stay tuned for more compelling narratives that shine a light on important social issues. Let's keep the conversation going and work together toward positive change. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and comment below with your thoughts. I was wondering when you'd come to your senses. I assume you've changed your mind about my offer. Ethan shook his head, his resolve firm. I'm not here to accept your offer, Greg. I'm here to tell you I'm done with all of this. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Done? What are you talking about? I'm done with the cutthroat games, the power plays, all of it, Ethan said calmly. I've spent too long hurting people, and I'm not going to be that man anymore. Hawthorne scoffed. Come on, Ethan. Don't tell me you've gone soft. Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. I've changed, Greg. And if you can't respect that, then we have nothing more to talk about. Hawthorne stared at him for a long moment, clearly taken aback by Ethan's newfound conviction. Finally, he shrugged. Your loss, Carter. But don't expect anyone else to play nice in this world. Ethan smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. I'm not looking for nice, Greg. I'm looking for something real. With that, Ethan stood and walked out of the restaurant, leaving his old life and his old self behind. As the months passed, Ethan and Olivia's relationship continued to flourish. They had built something strong, something real, and for the first time they both felt like they could see a future together. They had weathered the storm of their past and were ready to face whatever came next. But then, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. One morning, Olivia woke up feeling nauseous, a sensation she hadn't experienced before. At first, she thought it was just stress or fatigue. But when the symptoms persisted for days, she decided to go to the doctor. The news she received was shocking. She was pregnant. Olivia sat in stunned silence as the doctor explained the results. She had never expected this, especially not now, in the midst of everything she and Ethan were going through. How could she bring a child into this world, knowing the history she and Ethan shared? And how would Ethan react to the news? That evening, as she returned to the penthouse, Olivia struggled with how to tell Ethan. She wasn't sure how he would take it, whether he would be excited, terrified, or somewhere in between. But she knew she had to tell him. She found him in the living room reading a book, his expression peaceful. For a moment she stood there watching him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan," Olivia said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He looked up, immediately sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" Olivia took a deep breath, her hands trembling. I went to the doctor today." Ethan's brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" "What did they say?" "Impregnant?" Olivia blurted out, the words escaping her before she could stop them. For a moment Ethan was silent, his eyes wide with shock. Olivia braced herself for his reaction, unsure of what to expect. But then, to her surprise, Ethan's face broke into a wide, joyful smile. You're pregnant." Olivia nodded, her heart racing. "Yes." Without warning, Ethan pulled her into his arms, laughing and holding her close. "That's amazing, Olivia." "I can't believe it." Olivia blinked, surprised by his reaction. "You're happy." "Of course I'm happy," Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. "This is incredible. I know it's unexpected, but I'm ready for this. I'm ready to be a father." Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her, the tension in her chest easing. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the joy of the moment, the joy of knowing that she and Ethan were going to start a family together. As the reality of their future together began to sink in, Ethan knew there was one more thing he needed to do. He had fallen in love with Olivia not just because of the circumstances that had brought them together, but because of the person she was. Strong, independent, and unyielding in her values, she had made him want to be a better man. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Ethan led Olivia out onto the balcony, where the lights of the city sparkled below. It was the same balcony where they had shared so many important conversations, where their relationship had started to change. "Olivia," Ethan began, his heart racing, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through, about how we started, where we are now, and where we're going." Olivia smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ethan nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "We have, and I don't want to lose what we've built. I want to spend the rest of my life with you not because of a bet or an agreement, but because I love you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring, its brilliance shining in the soft light. "I know this is unexpected," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I love you, Olivia. I love the life we're building together, and I want to make it official. Will you marry me this time for real?" Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she looked at the man in front of her, the man who had once been her enemy, but who had since become the love of her life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, he'll marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his heart swelling with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the lights of the city sparkled around them. This time their marriage wouldn't be based on a bet. It would be built on love, trust, and the promise of a future they would face together. A few months later, Ethan and Olivia stood together in front of a small group of family and friends, exchanging vows in a quiet, intimate ceremony. It was nothing like their first wedding. There were no business contracts, no hidden agendas, and no expectations of control or power. This time it was real. Olivia's mother was there, smiling proudly as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Ethan's family, too, had gathered to witness the moment, their support a reminder of how far he had come. As Ethan and Olivia stood before the officiant, their hands clasped together, they exchanged vows filled with love and sincerity. There was no need for grand declarations, just the quiet promise to stand by each other, no matter what the future held. "I promise to love you," Ethan said, his voice steady, "to respect you, and to be the man you deserve. For as long as we both live." Olivia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "And I promise to love you, Ethan, to trust you, and to build a life with you, one filled with love, forgiveness, and hope." As they kissed, the small group of friends and family erupted into applause, but for Ethan and Olivia, the world around them seemed to disappear. In that moment, they were the only two people who mattered. As the months passed, Ethan and Olivia settled into their new life together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as they prepared to welcome their child into the world, they found themselves filled with a sense of peace and fulfillment. Ethan continued his efforts to make amends for his past mistakes, but now he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just trying to atone for his wrongs, he was trying to build a better future, not only for himself and Olivia, but for their growing family. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Olivia resting her head on Ethan's shoulder, she looked up at him with a contented smile. "Who would have thought," she mused softly, "that it would all start with a bet?" Ethan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's funny, isn't it, that something so ridiculous could lead to something so wonderful?" Olivia nodded, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "But I'm glad it did. Because now we get to build this life together. And that's all I've ever wanted." As they sat together in the quiet of their home, Ethan knew that this life, this love was the best thing he had ever won. Not through manipulation, not through power, but through genuine love, hard-earned respect, and the promise of a future filled with hope. A few months later, Ethan and Olivia welcomed their baby girl into the world. As Ethan held their newborn daughter in his arms, tears filled his eyes. He had never imagined that his life could feel this complete, this meaningful. Olivia watched him, her heart full as she saw the joy in his eyes. They had come so far through pain, anger, and betrayal, but now they were a family. A real family. As Ethan looked down at their daughter, he smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. He had spent so long searching for power, for control, but now he realized that true strength came from love, from vulnerability, and from the willingness to change. "Welcome to the world, little one," Ethan whispered, his voice full of emotion. "You're going to have an amazing life." Olivia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they looked down at their daughter together. "She's perfect," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "She is," Ethan agreed, his heart swelling with love. And as they sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of a life filled with love, forgiveness, and endless possibilities. They had started with a bet, but now they had built something real, something that would last forever. What do you think? Do you believe in second chances, or is some damage too deep to repair? We'd love to hear your thoughts on Ethan and Olivia's journey in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more inspiring tales of love, redemption, and hope. Thanks for watching. And as long as he stayed true to his values, he knew he was on the right path. The night stretched on, full of promise and potential. And as Ethan gazed out at the city below, he couldn't help but feel excited for the future, for the challenges, the victories, and the continued fight for a world where everyone, no matter who they were, could rise to their full potential. This was his legacy, and it was just the beginning. As Ethan gazed out at the city below, he couldn't help but feel excited for the future, for the challenges, the victories, and the continued fight for a world where everyone, no matter who they were, could rise to their full potential. This was his legacy, and it was just the beginning. If you've enjoyed this story of Ethan's journey toward leadership and change, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more inspiring stories like this one. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Together we can keep the conversation about diversity and inclusion going. I was thinking about it too, James said, his voice quiet but reflective. It feels like so much has happened, but at the same time, it's hard to believe how far we've come. Mildred nodded, her eyes misting over with emotion. I never thought I'd live to see the day when this town could change like this. For so long it felt like we were stuck. But you showed us something different. You showed us that we could be better. James felt a lump form in his throat. I didn't do it alone, Mildred. It's been all of us. People like you, Rachel, Emily, Tommy even. Mildred chuckled softly. Maybe, but we all needed someone to remind us what we were capable of. That's what you did, James. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the sunset over the park. It was a quiet, reflective moment, one that reminded James of why he had stayed, why he had chosen to fight for this town. It's not over, James said, more to himself than to Mildred. There's still work to be done. There's always more to be done, Mildred replied with a knowing smile. But you've given this town something it didn't have before: hope. Meanwhile, Emily Green had been working on her biggest story yet. The pieces she had written for the local paper had caught the attention of a national magazine, and they had commissioned her to write a long-form feature about the transformation of Hollow Creek. She had spent months interviewing people: James, Tommy, Rachel, Sheriff Nate Johnson, and countless others. She poured her heart into the article, determined to capture the essence of what had happened in this small town. It wasn't just a story about racism or a fight for equality. It was about community, about resilience, about the power of one person's actions to ignite change. When the feature was published, it was an instant success. Readers from across the country were moved by the story of Hollow Creek, and Emily was flooded with messages of support. People wanted to know more. How had the town done it? How could they replicate that success in their own communities? For Emily, it was a deeply personal victory. She had grown up in Hollow Creek, and for a long time, she hadn't believed that the town could change. But now, as she read the responses to her article, she knew that anything was possible. The next spring, the first integrated class graduated from Hollow Creek High School. It was a historic moment, not just for the students, but for the entire town. The graduation ceremony was held in the town square, and the entire community showed up to celebrate. James was there, sitting in the front row with Mildred, Tommy, and Rachel, all of them beaming with pride. Lily Sanders, Mildred's granddaughter, gave the valedictory speech, speaking eloquently about the future, about unity, and about the lessons they had learned from the town's struggles. We are the generation that will carry this town forward, Lily said, her voice clear and strong, and we will do it together. Because we've learned that we are stronger when we stand as one. The crowd erupted into applause, and as the graduates tossed their caps into the air, there was a sense of triumph, of new beginnings. Hollow Creek had come so far, and now a new generation was ready to take the reins. As the town continued to grow and change, Harold Brooks made a surprising announcement. He was bringing back the name Rose's Diner. But this time, the name would reflect something different. Harold stood outside the diner, addressing a small crowd of onlookers. James, Mildred, and the rest of the diner's regulars were there, curious about the announcement. Rose's Diner was named after my mother, Harold began, his voice filled with emotion. She was a kind woman, a woman who believed in treating everyone with respect. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We let this place become a symbol of division. Harold paused, glancing at James, who gave him an encouraging nod. But now I want to reclaim that name, Harold continued. This diner is going to stand for something new, something my mother would be proud of. It's going to be a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone has a seat at the table. The crowd cheered, and as the new sign for Rose's Diner was unveiled, it felt like a fitting tribute to the town's journey. As summer approached, Rachel Morales prepared to leave Hollow Creek once again, this time for good. Her work had taken her to other towns and cities, and while she had grown deeply attached to Hollow Creek, she knew it was time to move on. On her last night in town, she gathered with James, Emily, and the others at Rose's Diner for one final meal. The atmosphere was warm and nostalgic, filled with laughter and shared memories. "I'm going to miss this place," Rachel admitted as she sipped her coffee. "But I know you all are going to keep the momentum going." "Well, miss you too, Rachel," James said, smiling warmly. "But don't worry, we've got this." They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the town's journey, about how far they had come, and about the road that still lay ahead. When it was time to say goodbye, there were hugs, tears, and promises to keep in touch. But as Rachel drove away from Hollow Creek the next morning, she left knowing that the town was in good hands. Several months after Rachel's departure, James received a letter from her. He sat on his porch, the autumn air crisp and cool, as he read her words. "Dear James, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about Hollow Creek a lot lately, and I wanted to check in. I've been working with a community out west, and it reminds me so much of where Hollow Creek was when I first arrived. But seeing the progress we made gives me hope that change is possible, no matter where you are. I just wanted to thank you once again for everything you've done for the town and for me. You've taught me so much about patience, about perseverance, and about how change really happens. You'll never forget our time together. Take care of yourself, James, and take care of Hollow Creek. With gratitude, Rachel." James smiled as he folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Rachel's words were a reminder that their work was far from over, but it was also a reminder of how much they had already accomplished. Over time, Tommy Barnes fully embraced his role as a leader in the town's new direction. He became a regular volunteer at the community center, working with young people who, like him, had once been resistant to change. One afternoon, as Tommy sat on a bench outside the center, talking with a group of teenagers, he realized just how far he had come. The anger and fear that had once controlled him were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. "I used to think change was something to be afraid of," Tommy told the teens. "But now I see it's what makes us better. We can't grow if we don't open ourselves up to new ways of thinking." The teens listened intently, nodding in agreement. Tommy's journey had become an inspiration to many, showing that it was never too late to change. One year after the March for Unity, the town of Hollow Creek came together once again to celebrate. The town square was filled with music, food, and laughter, as people from all walks of life gathered to reflect on the progress they had made. James stood with Sheriff Nate Johnson, Emily Green, and Lily Sanders, watching the festivities with a deep sense of pride. The town was thriving, its people united by a shared vision of a better future. As the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow over the square, James felt a quiet sense of contentment. Hollow Creek had been through so much, but they had come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever. In the years that followed, Hollow Creek continued to evolve. The town's story became a beacon of hope for other communities struggling with their own divisions. People came from far and wide to visit Rose's Diner, to see the mural painted by the teenagers, and to meet the people who had made change possible. But for James, it wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about being a hero or a leader. It was about the quiet, steady work of building a community where everyone had a place. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above the town, James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, that there would always be more work to do. But for now, in this moment, he was content. Hollow Creek was his home, and it was a home worth fighting for. As the story of James and Hollow Creek shows, change takes courage, community, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. If you've been inspired by their journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of unity, justice, and hope. And remember, your voice matters. Let us know in the comments how this story touched you and what kind of stories you'd love to hear next. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free. Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors' sons, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith. Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She, too, had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant. a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better now, richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.